Hello, so just recently I conducted an interview with somebody who experienced the foster care system, which is the subject of my research project. And I talked to her a little bit about her experience in the foster care system, in the home that she was in, and the family that she was eventually adopted by. And in general, I just got a vibe of what the system was because there's a lot of controversy about the foster care system and the types of reforms that it needs, so I just wanted to get like a first-hand kind of perspective on it. But she said that she was placed in the foster care system when she was about 5, and she lived in the same home her entire life, and she was adopted by the family, and it started out okay, and then eventually when she got older, it got to the point where it was just more abusive than it was, like, productive and supportive. And she said that, for example, she was hit by her foster father. She was verbally abused. They told her that they only wanted her for the money that the state was giving her family for housing her as a foster child and situations like that. And it became apparent to me that like the abuse that she experienced is not uncommon among other foster kids. So it was more support in my theory that foster care is not a good system in the United States. So, in the year 2015, the Committee on Early Childhood Adoption and Dependent Care received 4.1 million reports of children in the United States, and those were of maltreatment cases, and those abused were roughly 143,000 received foster care. So, there are a lot of kids like this girl that I talked to who doesn't wish to be named that have been removed from their biological homes and put into foster homes. American society has made strides to help children in need by creating the foster care system, or the child welfare system as they like officially call it, and they're moved out of dangerous situations and homes into their foster families. So basically, a foster family is a family that volunteers and is government funded to care for children that are not theirs, which is supposed to be a good thing. But in an investigation of foster care runaways by the organization Fostering Perspectives, 1 in 6 children who ran away reported it was because they felt unsafe in their foster care placement. And that was in the state of North Carolina in 2015. So I did some math, and I applied it to that, and I applied it also to this statistic that was collected by the Children's Bureau in 2014, that there were 415,000 children in the foster care system. And so I applied the 1 in 6%, 16% of children that felt unsafe in their homes would measure with that. The means were roughly 66,000 children in foster care who were feeling unsafe, possibly abused, and unwelcome in their foster care homes. So foster care homes are supposed to be a safe place, obviously, for abused and neglected children, but that is not usually the case. The system abuses in the foster care system are very unrecognized by the government and by people in general in America. And not only is child maltreatment a serious issue, but it has lasting psychological effects on a child, and this could have serious effects on their future. Children are a very important aspect of society, and they make up a large percentage of children in foster care make up a large percentage of the children in the U.S. today, and their futures are our futures. So long term, it's going to affect bigger outlets of American society, such as higher education, adults with careers that support the next generation, and even will affect smaller things like the homeless community. So I'm going to be talking about the types of reforms that have already occurred, the issues in the foster care system today, and what the government is doing to fix them. So to narrow down where the foster care abuse is coming from, I'm going to start with the history of it. So foster care stemmed from orphanages originally in the United States. According to the Adoption History Project, the term foster was supposed to contrast with institutional care. So it was supposed to provide a family structure to children who didn't have one, and it was supposed to take children from poor conditions of orphanages in the 19th century and put them into homes that would care for them and provide the family structure that they weren't getting in the orphanages. And orphanages were very prominent, but they were not sufficient to care for children. They actually caused more harm than they did good. So Henry Dwight Chapin, who is a pediatrician and founder of the first foster care agency in the United States, said that orphanages literally sickened and killed alarming numbers of children. So it was on that idea that he and his wife created the Children's Aid Society, and that eventually led to the end of orphanages in the United States starting in the 19th century and the creation of the foster care system. But obviously the new system isn't without its flaws. I mean, there are many children who are abused, like the girl that I interviewed. So, for example, and this is more on the issues today, so the Children's Bureau on Foster Care Rights said that the right to be free from cruel, frightening, or unsafe discipline was one of the most important rights that a child could have, and so is the right to be protected from abuse and neglect. And they provide crisis helplines for children if they're in danger or if their rights are violated. But you have to think about the fact that laws aren't really created unless there's a reason. And so that means that the abuse in the foster care system is prominent and that they're trying to do something to stop it. And therefore they've created these child abuse and protection laws for kids that are in their foster system. So oftentimes in reaction to abuse, foster kids will run away, as I mentioned earlier, but Fostering Perspective Survey concluded that children don't often leave the system by running away, which is necessarily, it's not necessarily an issue, but the kids are not safe when they're leaving. They run from their homes and it puts them in danger. They could get lost, kidnapped, or killed. And the government has recognized these risks and has been attempting reform since the time of orphanages, but they haven't been able to stop the abuse in the system, and therefore they haven't been able to save the kids who run away and are abused or kidnapped or stolen or whatever happens to them that might be bad. So ending orphanages was the first step, and then foster care left the hands of volunteer organizations, so the orphanages were run by churches beforehand. And then people like Henry Dwight Chapin created their welfare systems, and it expanded as a concept. In his journal, Michael Wald discusses other foster care reform that has taken place. So in 1980, the Child Welfare Act was passed, and it was establishing the requirements for reasonable removal, or reasonable efforts to avoid removal, which basically means that if a parent can show that they're making progress and that they're trying to support their children and they're trying to help their children, then the foster care, the CPS, won't take their kids away. And so this decreased the amount of kids that were in foster care, but it didn't stop child maltreatment. Another thing is that now when CPS places children in the system in homes, they try to keep it in biological families. So if I was removed from my parents' home, but there was my grandma or my aunt or my uncle, they would put me with one of them before they would put me with a complete stranger so that I could still have contact with the people that I know, which provides the child with more security, but it helps for them to feel more comfortable. But there are still other problems. Excuse me. So one of the other forms of foster care reform are, they're unsupported by the public. So in 1981, $200 million was proposed to reform, according to Sheila Rule in the New York Times, but lack of support decreased the amount to $185 million. And this kind of put the reform system on the back burner for the foster care, for child welfare, and by doing that, it also put those kids on the back burner as well, and so they were undersupported by loving families, and a lot of kids, experience the bad parts of the foster care system. So children, like I said, are the future of the country, and reform is still needed because these kids are not being given the opportunities that they deserve, and they're not set up for success. Frequent home changing is also an issue. So, like, a kid will often be moved from one home to another, and because they're moving to different homes, they're also put in different schools. So in his TED Talk, Robert Duke discussed education of foster care children, and his research showed that 84% of foster care children, when asked, said they wanted to go to college, but only 50% graduated at 18, and only 4% received a college degree. So college obviously is an ingrained part of society, and long-term, the lack of education of foster care kids could result in limited career opportunities and homelessness. And that sounds like a long shot, of course, but there's actually research published by Dr. Cheryl Zlotnick, and she found that 48.7% of people who either had children in foster care or were in foster care themselves had a history of homelessness. So almost half of the people who either had homeless parents or are homeless were at one point in the foster care system. And part of that could be the issue of education, also the abuse and the running away. So maybe some of these homeless people that you see on the streets are actually foster care kids who ran away from their homes and just grew up on their own. So what can be done? So for one, background checks of foster parents is very important, because if a kid is exposed to a home that is not safe, then they're probably dealing with that because of the parents. So the background checks need to, discover if there's anything like felonies or previous child abuse or something like drugs, things like that need to be talked about and discussed before a foster parent is given the rights to provide for a child. Another thing is frequent relicensing and reexamining of foster care parents, because just because they don't abuse children when they're initially licensed doesn't mean that they don't end up doing so after they're renewed their license or have had it for several years. So foster care parents need to be re-examined frequently. And for another, abusive homes or homes that have a past of abuse need to be eliminated. So children should not be put back into homes that are abusive, even if, like, the foster parent says, "Oh, I'll never do it again. It was just one time. It's okay." They're lying. Children need to be taken seriously when they're talking about these things. And oftentimes they're not, which means that those kids are going back to homes, or new kids are being brought in to experience the same things that the ones before did. And it's an endless cycle of abuse. Overall, the foster care system does need reform to fix the abuse issue and the maltreatment issue of children, because the point of the foster care system is to take kids who are abused and put them in homes that will take care of them. And it's going to be a long process, no one can deny that, but it's true that you can't save everyone, but saving someone is a good place to start. Thank you.